I work with organizations, be them, L&D functions within a company or edtech companies, to embrace evidence-informed practice and to make sure that as a function, what L&D is looking to do is improve performance rather than create content or basically spend money in another name. What I'm spending most of my time on at the minute is figuring out how, as an industry, we embrace evidence-informed practice, how we draw from the best of scientific research that's happened and continues to happen and contextualize it and use it in the workplace to drive better performance outcomes within organizations. Ultimately, it all comes down to touchpoints. When and where are people able and willing to engage with the material? So often, training happens either in the classroom or on the LMS, and work happens on the line, in the office, wherever a job is done. And never the two shall meet. They are entirely separate and therefore effectively don't support one another. We feel like they do. Now you've learned everything in the classroom, go to a completely different environment filled with different things, different tools, different contexts, and do exactly the same thing. When you put it like that, it becomes obvious as to why this isn't working and why what looks like alignment is actually just coexistence. What we're missing are those connecting lines. How do we put what people need where and when they need it? How do we get the training intervention, whether it's a course, an e-learning, a video, whatever it is, as close as possible to the actual work? Those lines of connectivity aren't just location and time, they are also people. Line managers play a huge role in whether or not someone develops a skill, what they've learned and how they learned it, and how others can learn to do the same thing. When someone says, I completed a course, to them, they mean I did all this work. I put in this time, I put in this effort and this energy, and I made the choice to funnel all of that into doing this thing that I view as being productive. As someone who designed the course, what I hear is, my course is doing well. My course is having a positive impact. As someone who paid for the thing, I'm hearing, that's a bill. We have spent this money. This time that we paid this person for, we have lost on them doing this course. Doesn't make it a bad thing, but we're all seeing the same thing and understanding it to be different. And this is exactly what happens, I think, with these L&D functions and organizations, because many of them are perfectly happy with their siloed LMS, their lack of connection to line manager, the fact that people don't share learning within their organization, because that's not how it works. Learning comes from the top down, always has done, always will do. It's how schools work, it's how universities work, and therefore it's how the workplace should work. The fact that none of those three systems work particularly well is just ignored, because they feel good. Because when we achieve something in them, we're congratulated or whatever it might be. The challenge really is to ask ourselves much more difficult questions and say, great, that feels good. We are proud of what we've done. Give me the numbers. What impact does it have? Prove its value. And then when we can't do that, we have to be willing to say, I love this, I'm proud of it, now we need to put it in the bin and make something that actually has an impact. The only solution is to be a little bit harder on ourselves in the questions that we ask and the honesty with which we answer them, and then address those problems. For me, it's always backwards design. We start with where we want people to be, the skills we want them to have, and then we track that back to where they are, realizing where the missing pieces are. There's the behavior engineering model by Thomas Gilbert. Ultimately, everything, I think, that is workplace performance related, which every skill should be aligned to, should go through that, basically considering environmental versus individual. Is this a capability problem? Is this a knowledge problem? Or actually, is this a computer systems problem? Whenever it comes to alignment, it is about those key things, that backwards design and behavior engineering, ultimately come down to talking to the business. Not just to one level of the business, but to every level and every area, and understanding that skills are not static. That's the most challenging thing. How do we clearly define the expectations on these people? So when we say someone has the skill to be able to have challenging conversations with their team, what does that actually entail? What does having that conversation well look like? And to answer that, you're going to need input from the people having the conversations on both sides. You're going to have conversations with subject matter experts, and you're going to have conversations around expectations with senior leadership, who are going to tell you what they want to be seeing. And so our job, I think, is to ask the questions, gather the inputs, and then use those inputs to synthesize a skill that is inherently aligned, and then only design training that improves some behavior or some capability that we have defined as being part of that skill. There's one thing that kind of enables everything else, which is observation. That's observation of the job being done. Because we have to understand the reality of what this thing looks like when it's being applied. If we don't have that, we can't do anything else. Because what that gives us effectively is what I describe as like the filing cabinet for this task. It gives us the structure. It tells us that, okay, so the realities of doing this thing are that it happens in this environment, it happens with these types of people or these personas, it happens perhaps at a specific time, it happens with a particular piece of technology or whatever it might be. An interesting example of this, I was working with a contact center, basically difficult conversations between managers and people working in the contact center, which is a really varied audience and always very challenging to manage and to train. The basic profile we got was the fact that these conversations happen once a week. They happen on a one-to-one basis. They happen in these small offices. These offices have the following stigma attached to them. It's where difficult conversations happen. That gives us our framework for what's the reality of someone doing this. Over that, we then lay into those senior leadership expectations of each of these things. We get to have a root cause analysis conversation here. We get to say, so, what is it that's attached this stigma to the place? Oh, well, actually, that's a symptom of the fact that these conversations aren't being handled well. So then we go up to the next thing and we start looking at those individual factors. We start looking at, so who's having these calls? These managers. Which of these managers is doing really well and which of them is perhaps not? We identify our peak performer or our exemplar, if you will. And then we look at our observation again of the identified exemplar performer and we say, okay, so what are they doing that no one else is doing? Oh, well, they are making sure that an agenda goes out to the people before the call so they know exactly what they are walking into this meeting expecting. That's something we need to include in this alignment piece. Very quickly, just through observing the people actually doing the role, then looking at it with senior leaders and talk about their expectations versus realities, and then looking at this exemplar performer, you don't have to actually work very hard to identify these things. They will become more obvious. Those are the things that as training professionals, we should then go, can we scale that? How do I make every other manager in the business do that? What we then want to do, of course, is make sure that we're right. And this is where we go from observation and data into experimentation. That could be as big as a pilot program, which generally needs a pretty sizable group to take it on. Or we might go for something much smaller, like a desktop study, where we basically ask managers and employees, is this something that would help? So you kind of have to scale based on the resources that are available to you or the appetite for risk in the organization. When it comes to metrics, every organization is wildly different because everyone inherently cares about different stuff. But in most cases, it almost always comes back to money. Money saved or money made. Going back to that contact center environment, the metrics on those conversations were relatively easy because they already had a fortnightly pulse survey where we could see that people were identifying these end-of-week conversations as a major drag on organizational happiness. So we use that as a core metric. Now, it doesn't mean it's the only metric that counts, because we know that if it's impacting the happiness index score, it's also going to be impacting things like motivation, which we don't have a set measure for, but we know impacts everything else they do in the workplace. So what we did was start looking at when did this happen, when was there the drop in the happiness index score, and what else dropped at the same time or shortly after that. And sure enough, we found that call times got longer, customer service scores had dropped in terms of what the customers were rating, and actually revenue collection from this contact center had gone down. So we were able to basically package these up and say collectively, by fixing this problem of these conversations, by enabling managers to have them better and be more productive with them, yes, we will in the short term see an increase in the happiness index on a fortnightly basis, but we will also then see a return to the previous line on revenues collected, on call times, and on customer service scores. Sure enough, we were able to see the happiness index ticked up a few points. The revenues actually ended up exceeding what they were previously doing. What we saw was about 4% over the baseline.